over 1,100 people. That is almost equivalent to the number of male seniors enrolled in courses on campus at BYU, Idaho. These 1,100 people, though, are fighting, struggling for the fight of their life, not knowing if they would come out victorious. Many of them prayed for death to come for them, freeing them and relieving them of pain, suffering, and agony. These interesting statistics I learned while stationed at Naval Basic Training in Great Lakes, Illinois, as well as thorough research of Pearl Harbor and other significant events of World War II. 1,100 sailors, Marines, soldiers, airmen, even civilians seems like an unbearable number, but is even more unbearable when you know the story behind a certain individual. The power of one is the phrase that I like to use. Don Stratton shared his story in his memoir published regarding the attacks at Pearl Harbor and his career in the Navy during World War II. These 1,100 men saw it as an ordinary Sunday morning where they could enjoy their day at the beaches of Hawaii, sightsee, and see many things that they never thought were imaginable, or enjoy a nice hot breakfast aboard the ship where they were stationed. At 0751, history would never be the same for these men. We are often told if we do not learn from history, we are often doomed to repeat it. For these reasons, I will highlight the significant and unforetold events of World War II, including Pearl Harbor, the Battle of Midway, Doolittle's Raid, and how these events led to the war's end with a deadly and fatal atomic bomb. Pearl Harbor was a surprise attack that no one expected to occur. What many do not know, however, is that the battleship USS Arizona was not supposed to be at the harbor. It received orders to sail back to Washington State approximately 2 months before the attack. Due to inclement weather, the Arizona collided with another ship, causing minor damage. The Arizona was then sent back to Hawaii to receive repairs. Because of these events, the sailors on board were ordered to instruct their families that they will not be home for the Christmas season. The Japanese were at a moment in history where they were rising to power. With this power, they were trying to conquer the islands of the Pacific and much more. The U.S. noticed this, and due to economic standpoint, they cut off supplies that were being traded to Japan, such as rubber and other natural resources. This angered the Japanese, and they planned to attack Hawaii since it was a stronghold for the U.S. Navy. The Japanese referred to Hawaii as a dagger, pointing at their neck, the neck being Japan. A U.S. ship picked up something on their radar, and when a senior officer said it was just aircraft being launched for a practice mission, nobody thought anything of it. It was a code green, or all is well and clear. Less than 2 hours later, radar picked up several aircraft, and at this point, it was too late. The Japanese sent over 400 aircraft, dropping hundreds of bombs, torpedoes, and missiles. These explosives caused severe damage as U.S. warships were being sunk, capsized, and exploded into a pile of melted steel. This caused oil to cover the freezing water at the Pearl. For 110 minutes, almost 2 hours, aircraft flew overhead, severely injured sailors took cover, hospitals flooded with victims, bombs were dropped on warships and many other hangars and different various buildings. These turn of events would send the U.S. into World War II. Approximately 6 months after those horrific attacks, the U.S. went into the Battle of Midway. This ended up being a turning point in the war for the U.S. and brought much needed morale. Not so much, however, for the Japanese. After about 3 days of battle, the Japanese lost an extensive number of aircraft and ships. 4 carriers and well over 200 aircraft were destroyed for the Japanese. The death toll rose to over 3,000. This 3,000 was approximately the number of total killed in the attacks at Pearl Harbor. For the U.S., we only lost 1 carrier and about 150 aircraft. The death toll was around 300, horrific, but not nearly as much for the Japanese. This battle renewed hope for the U.S. and stored morale for the war effort for the U.S. and its allies. The Japanese, however, did not understand the full message, and they continued to attack even after they had extensive number of casualties and victims and loss of equipment. After the successive victories in these many battles, including Midway and others, the time has come when the U.S. planned strategically to bring the war to the island of Japan. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle organized pilots from the U.S. Army to fly B-25 bombers. This mission eventually turned into what we know as Doolittle's Raid. They were launched from the carrier the USS Hornet. It was unusual because at this time, bombers were usually not launched from an aircraft carrier, and it was a difficult task, but Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle proved successful and carried on with the mission. Because of the extensive weight of the bomber, they had to strip everything from the bomber and leave just fuel so that they can make it to Tokyo. And for some of these, the fuel weighed too much that they had to make it as light as possible so that the bomber could lift off the carrier and not sink into the ocean. It was a risky mission, but paid off a success. After bombing Tokyo, factories, buildings, and whatever they can bomb, more hope was restored to the U.S., and morale continued to boost for the United States and its allies. The Japanese still did not understand the full message. They were told to surrender, but believed they were more powerful than the United States, and they continued to fight. After careful consideration, generals and admirals met with the president and discussed their options. After careful consideration of either invading Japan or an atomic bomb, the U.S. calculated the numbers and realized that an atomic bomb would be more efficient than losing much valuable number of military forces and members to an invasion on Japan. Thus, the U.S. dropped the first atomic bomb. Days later, a second was dropped. This power from the Americans convinced the Japanese to surrender after the second, and thus the Japanese finally did surrender in August of 1945, my apologies, and thus ended the bloody events of World War II. This nation owes a debt of gratitude for those living and for those that have gone before us, for their heroic efforts in defending Pearl Harbor, Midway, and for the Doolittle's Raid and many other events that have occurred so that our freedoms would not be infringed upon by those who pose as a threat to the United States of America. The men of the U.S. Navy have fought gallantly with honor, courage, and commitment. These values instilled in the Navy helped to establish a military force that defended America from enemies, as well as changed the way naval warfare was conducted on open waters. Excuse me. Since World War II, the U.S. Navy has fought in several other wars to help protect and defend the freedoms of America. America's men and women today continuously serve, answering our nation's call. I hope that you have all taken away a greater amount of respect for our men and women who serve our country, specifically those brave, gallant men who sacrificed so much during the attacks at Pearl Harbor and throughout World War II. With this respect, may you be able to help study history and how America's military has changed so that history does not repeat itself, putting us Americans at a greater sense of peace, now and in the future. Thank you.